The United States has imposed extensive human rights-related sanctions on dozens of people and entities tied to China, Myanmar, North Korea, and Bangladesh. The measures are the latest in a series of sanctions timed to coincide with US President Joe Biden's two-day virtual Summit for Democracy, where he announced initiatives to bolster democracy around the world and support for pro-democracy legislation in the United States. Meanwhile, the US State Department also barred 12 people from traveling to the United States, including officials in China, Belarus, and Sri Lanka.
Hello and welcome to Daily Mirror World Focus. I'm Iswaran Ratnam. Questions continue to be raised of the manner in which the Biden administration continues to deal with a number of countries on the human rights issue. Joining me on the program today is Ambassador Sam Browback, former US Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Yeah, delighted to join you, and I hope everything's going well in Sri Lanka and in that entire region.
You were a member of the Trump administration, and the manner in which the Trump administration dealt with human rights was also questioned. But how do you see the human rights situation right now globally and the way the US is dealing with this?
I think, unfortunately, the human rights situation globally is in decline with the ascendancy of a number of authoritarian regimes in different parts of the world, most notably China, because of its far reach. But I think it's fine. I think we need to get back to the basics on human rights and the agreement, the 1948 UN Charter agreement, and get back and really push on those. They're agreed to by everybody around the world. I think that's really what's going to take for us to get back into a focus on human rights and get them back in ascendancy around the world instead of in decline. I think our foundation has crumbled on human rights, and I think I think it's a serious global issue.
Do you think that organizations like the United Nations and the Human Rights Council are doing enough to address some of these issues, or are they just, limiting everything to words?
I don't think they're doing near enough. And I think some of their actions are counter to human rights. If the UN Secretary General attends the Olympics at the same time that China has a genocide going on of Uyghur Muslims, I think that's a terrible double standard and hypocrisy. If he does that, the US and several countries have announced an economic, or not an economic, but a diplomatic boycott. I've called for an advertisers boycott of these Olympics. Let the athletes go ahead and compete, but we shouldn't line the pockets of China if they're going to conduct a genocide and literally a war on faith. They're at war with every faith. At the same time, they've got an Olympics going. So I don't think the UN is doing near enough. And in many cases, they even undermine the Human Rights Project by some of the stands and the things they seem to back by their lack of voice against it.
So are you saying that even US athletes should not attend the Beijing Olympics?
No, I think they should attend the Olympics. A year ago, I was calling for the Olympics to be moved to another venue. And I thought they should have been moved, but we're too late for that to take place. What I am saying is that the UN Secretary General should not attend these Olympics as a diplomatic statement. If the United States or France, let's say, were hosting the Olympics, and at the same time, we had 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in a concentration camp, do you think the UN Secretary General would speak out against that and would come to the Olympics honoring our nation? And there is no way they would. So the double standard, the hypocrisy with which they treat China differently on human rights than they do the West it just speaks volumes, and it's wrong. The UN should be the foremost body around the world speaking for human rights, and they do not.
Let's go back to the time that you were part of the Trump administration. I mean, what sort of steps did President Trump and then Secretary of State take on some of these human rights issues? You were dealing with religious freedom as well. I mean, since you saw what was going on in China and in other countries as well, what sort of steps did you all take to sort of address this issue?
Well, we declared what was happening in Western China as a genocide against the Uyghurs. We pushed aggressively on the situation of the Rohingya coming out of Myanmar and what was taking place. I visited the refugee camps there. I worked with Uyghurs. We hosted international forums on religious freedom, the two foreign ministers' summits on religious freedom that we had in Washington, D.C. We formed an organization, an international organization, International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance of some 30, I think 3 nations now, to push for religious freedom for everybody, everywhere, all the time. That's our standard. But that's the UN Charter standard, the 1948 Section 18 standard, is that you're entitled to religious freedom, whoever you are and wherever you are, and it's at all times. And we pushed for getting really back to those basics on human rights so that we could move forward, really securing and rebuilding our foundation of what this entire human rights project globally is built on.
But do you think that the steps that you took resulted in some sort of progress, or was it, a case where China just turned a blind eye to the issue?
They've not only turned a blind eye to it, they've turned both eyes and focused on it and said in your face, we're going to keep doing it, and we're going to do more of it, and we're going to fund it around the world. And they hold one of the things that I think I'm most troubled about for as far as the future of oppression. To me, the future of oppression is going to be a virtual police state. It's not going to be as many people locked up or excluded out of a country. It's going to be these high-tech cameras, artificial intelligence, digital currency, controlling people to where they can't move or do anything within a culture if they are out of the mainstream of religious thought, or in the case of China, atheistic thought. They're going to be excluded from participation in the society. And this is a diabolical thing, and it's going to be exported. The systems are going to be exported to other authoritarian regimes, and it's become increasingly difficult for a person to practice their faith, or certainly to be a minority religion in a majority religion country.
So how should the global community deal with China? I mean, China is like you said, just turning its entire self away from this issue and not willing to discuss or negotiate. At the same time, they're also funding certain countries which are aligning themselves with them. And giving them support on the international stage.
It's a tough problem, but I think we can start with things like the Olympics. I think a diplomatic boycott is a good start, and the UN should do a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics. I think an advertiser's boycott of the Olympics would be a good step forward, where companies from outside of China say, we're not going to fund these. If you're conducting these things. And if I could just say parenthetically, praise God for the Women's Tennis Association standing up for one of their own that disappeared, sexually abused in China. And they didn't just follow the money and say, oh, it's okay, we'll just go ahead and keep having our tournaments here. They pulled their tournaments, and they should. I think people need to start getting some backbone on these things, and it may cost them a little bit. But it's going to cost them a lot more in the long run if we allow China to get away with these things. A friend of mine is a Tibetan, and he said something I thought was quite accurate on this, is that either the world will change China or China will change the world. It's going to happen one way or the other. And I think the world needs to stand up now and to demand that if China is going to be a global leader, you have to play by the human rights rules that the world has established back in 1948.
When you have China offering financial assistance to some of these smaller nations, countries that depend on foreign funding, is there something more that the US should be doing to sort of step in and, maybe offer equal amount of assistance so that, China does not become one of the bigger players here?
I think so. I've been advocating through the IMF for special drawing rights for a number of countries, particularly now that we're in a pandemic and you've had all this disruption globally taking place. A number of countries are in great difficulty. In my past, I was a governor of a state, and you're always watching your budget to try to figure out how you keep your services funded. Well, that's the same with every country. They've got to watch their budget. And if they don't get money from the West because they need it for their budget, for their people, they're going to find it somewhere else. That's why I think really the special drawing rights, we should have more of those going to developing countries, particularly now in a pandemic and the disruptions that are taking place, would be one pretty simple, fairly straightforward tool that we could do. And then I think we need to confront China and working with these governments on funding them. Now, we're going to come in, if we do that, we're going to demand more transparency in their budgeting. We're going to demand more fiscal accountability. And I think that's as it should be as well. And I think that can be an assistance to some of these nations.
I just want to go back to some of the points you made on the UN and the Human Rights Council. The Trump administration pulled out of the Human Rights Council, basically accusing it of being weak and, siding on certain issues which the Trump administration did not agree on. Do you think that was the right move? Should the US have maybe stayed with the Human Rights Council and worked with the council to address issues like the Uyghur problem in China and, human rights issues in other countries?
Yeah, I don't know if that was a good move or not. I would really back up earlier. And I've been I take part of the blame for this. We backed away from a number of the UN institutions because they, in our estimation, they were being corrupted, and we just kind of were backing away from it. Well, that just created a vacuum for China to walk into. And so I think we're partially to blame for that. We should have more aggressively engaged, and the Human Rights Council, though, to allow countries like Iran, China, that when you've got an ongoing genocide and 1 million people in a concentration camp and you can't name your children Mohammed, and you're a member in good standing of the Human Rights Council, it seems like they ought to have some basic modicum of standards before that. But I think we should more aggressively engage. I think we should be very clear on what we stand for, but not back away from these institutions because it creates a vacuum for China to walk into.
The other question that often comes up is, what right does the US have to police other countries?
It's a good question, and I think we have the right that any other country has to criticize and to be criticized and to criticize ourselves. We're not perfect by any means, but we're always pushing for a standard and trying to move forward on human rights. Right now, I'm carrying an issue to apologize to Native Americans in the United States for things that we did here in our past. I think we've made mistakes and we need to be criticized for it. But I think that also allows us to criticize other nations of what they are doing, for us all to pull together more for the Global Human Rights Project. But there shouldn't be a double standard. There shouldn't be a higher standard for the West and a lower standard for China. China should be held to that same human rights standard. And that's what I'm calling for. And I think other countries in the West have every right to be able to call for that as well.
The withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan has drawn a lot of attention, particularly since the Taliban continues to commit human rights abuses, continues to disrespect rights of women. What should the U.S. do now?
Well, I thought that was one of the worst things the United States has done in the past several decades. And you look at what's taking place there now, there's going to be a genocide of religious minorities in Afghanistan if they don't get out. I'm working to help get them out of the country and permanently located in third countries. I think we need to be engaged. I think we need to get people out of there right now that are particularly religious minorities, Hindus, Ahmadi Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Shia Muslims. We need to get them out because they're getting slaughtered now, and if they won't get slaughtered directly, they'll get starved to death. I think is the thing to do now, and then I think that we're going to need to re-engage in Afghanistan. I wouldn't doubt we're going to be back in Afghanistan, the same as what happened in Iraq when President Obama pulled our troops back. And you had a genocide of Yazidis and Christians in northern Iraq. I wouldn't doubt you're going to see the same thing happening in Afghanistan, and you may well see it become another terrorist haven again, and we'll be back engaged again.
Do you agree with the decision to freeze funding in Afghanistan, since some say that this is affecting the ordinary people there as well?
I do agree with freezing the funding, but not humanitarian aid, not food and medicine. And we've typically bifurcated those in the past, where we've frozen economic aid, we've frozen aid to the government, but not food and medical aid, so that try to keep the people at least fed from starving to death, and health care, medicines available.
And what's your take on the U.S. administration removing Nigeria from the countries of concern list?
I think it's a bad move. You've got a terrorist convention coming together in northern Nigeria and that entire Sahel region. All the militant Islamic terrorist groups are putting operations or funding operations in that region. And that's the target for the next caliphate. We need to be engaged there now before it becomes a caliphate. And you've got levels of Christian persecution there that continue to go up. The bureaucracy in Washington at State Department and other places won the fight for the Secretary of State's mind on this, saying it had nothing to do with religion, when it certainly does have something to do with religion. I'm not saying religion is the whole issue, but it's one of the key divisions in that area. It's one of the things that the Islamic militant terrorists play upon, is that these people, the other people, don't agree with our view of faith, and they should be killed. And this is one of their key tactics, and they've used it around the world consistently. You can't deny that that's trying to use a religion as an instrument of war, and we need to stand up against it, or it only gets worse.
Since you spoke about the use of religion as an instrument of war, I mean, this religious extremism is something that is being discussed a lot in this region, in South Asia, in Asia, and globally as well. Be it various Muslim extremist groups and the manner in which they deal with, or the manner in which they use religion to carry out terrorism. And we've seen certain incidents in Pakistan as well, where, in fact, quite recently, a Sri Lankan was attacked on the accusation that he had committed blasphemy. I mean, how should governments deal with this whole issue of religious extremism, hate speech, and so on?
Yeah, when it happened in my state while I was governor, I had a Hindu man that was attacked because he looked different and believed different and was killed. Well, you don't just turn away from it then. We arrested the person that did it. We prosecuted him to the full extent of the law. And I, as governor, said, this does not stand for our values. We will not tolerate this. We will stand and fight against it. The answer isn't to exclude religion either, to say all religion is bad. I'm a man of faith myself. I follow Jesus. You're not going to stop people from being religious, and you shouldn't. I mean, the search for God's one of the great things of mankind. The key is for governments to stand up and protect everybody's right to religious freedom, whatever that faith view is, as long as it's peacefully practiced. Now, if you're going to go blow up buildings because of your faith, we're going to arrest you. And we're going to prosecute you to the full extent of the law. And I did that as well. But everybody else, if you want to peacefully practice your faith, we support that, and we will protect that. And if we don't have freedom of religion for everybody everywhere, you're going to see the global clash of civilizations. Because civilizations are basically built in most on top of a religion, on top of the values of a religion. When you've got conflicting religions, then that's when you get the clash of civilizations, unless the government steps in and says, we protect everybody's right to religious freedom and practice their own faith the way they see fit, as long as it's peaceful.
Is there a role that religious leaders, I mean, you have the Pope, you have Muslim religious leaders, Hindu, Buddhist as well. Should they be doing more as well? I mean, governments, yes, there is a role that they need to play, but should there be more done by some of these religious leaders as well to address these kind of issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And almost every world religion is at its heart calls for peace and love for your neighbor, even love for your enemy. Almost every one of them do. And so we really need the religious leaders to step up and to say, our faith does not support the use of violence in promoting the faith, in proselytizing, or in expressing the faith. It does not require the use of violence. It's opposed to the use of violence. Now, every faith, too, has its just war doctrine as to when are we justified in going to war. And that's a whole separate set of issues. But in the basic practice of the faith, I think the religious leaders have a very strong role. And we started, while I was at State Department, something like that, the Abrahamic Faith Initiatives, we called it. And we had religious leaders of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam standing together, saying together, signing statements together that we are opposed theologically to the use of violence in the practice of our faith, in the proselytizing of our faith. It's not there in the theology. And religious leaders need to do a lot more to use religion as an instrument of peace, which is what it's really about, not as an instrument of war.
The US issues annually a report on religious freedom, and this report mentions incidents taking place in a number of countries, and yet we see some of these governments continuing to abuse religious freedom, continuing to give space for extremists who are even mentioned in the report. What does the US propose, or what did you propose doing when countries continue to give recognition for groups and individuals that you see as being involved in abusing religious freedom?
I think we need to start sanctioning countries economically. I think they need to start seeing, and we use that tool once in a while. When Pastor Andrew Brunson was locked up in a Turkish prison, President Trump sanctioned steel and aluminum exports from Turkey into the United States, had a huge impact on their currency and their economy, and they released him. I think we need to start using that tool in places like Nigeria, in particular, where there's places that are economically sensitive. And then I also think we need to sell more the positive side of religious freedom. When you protect everybody's faith, you have a more diverse and satisfied population. You have less violence and you have less conflicting violence for as far as like the clash of civilization that takes place. And this is in the research and in the data. You also have more economic growth as this diversity, when it's allowed to interact peacefully with each other, creates economic activity. It's a positive for your economy. I mean, we've pushed religious freedom in the United States since our founding. It was what we were founded upon. And you've got one of the most diverse societies, probably the most diverse culture in the world by far here. We're not perfect, and we still have problems. We get Jewish temples get attacked. We get people of faith get attacked. But by and large, there's an accommodation and a protection for everybody's religious freedom. And that produces a human flourishing.
Should the U.S. Be dealing with countries? I mean, we see, for example, even in Sri Lanka, the U.S. has its economic and trade dealings with the government, yet they also raise the human rights issue. They criticize certain matters, and they play a big role in Geneva as well when it comes to pushing for human rights issues and reconciliation to be addressed. Should that balancing act be done where the US, gives funding on one side, gives assistance on one side, and on the other side criticizes the administration on the human rights issue when nothing is being done by the particular country of concern, that is?
Yeah, that's really kind of the age-old balancing question. How much do you engage, and how much do you comment and push? Henry Kissinger used to say it's a great thing to have the United States as a friend, and it's a terrible thing to have the United States as a friend. I mean, that it's just, if we engage with you, we're going to push human rights issues, and a lot of countries don't like that. I think it's one. I favor engagement overall. It's just when it gets to a point where the other country is not willing to do anything and is a clear abuser, like what's taking place in communist China today, then I'm saying, look, if you're going to keep trending down that road and try to get others down that road, then we need to be pulling back and separating our economic activity and our diplomatic activity and other things as well. But I think by and large, we should be engaged. I've worked in the Central Asia region for many years, the various nations there. And a lot of people have been critical of that engagement, but it's that engagement that then helps walk them towards, over a period of time, of a global human rights position that they're kind of moving towards now, other than Afghanistan and really to some Pakistan. Do
you agree with the Trump administration engaging with North Korea despite serious human rights issues that were taking place in that country?
I don't know that was a good move, because they've got huge human rights issues that they're doing. I think what President Trump saw was, here's a chance to head off a nuclear development, nuclear weapon development, and he saw personal engagement as a prospect. I was suspicious and suspect of it in the outset, because we've tried this tactic with the Kim family before, and it's never worked. They've entered into agreements with us, and they violate them before the ink's dry. So I thought it was suspect because we tried it before.
Did you raise concerns? Did you voice your objections to that move?
No, not internally. We didn't. My bucket of issues weren't front and center. I raised it with some of the people that were involved with it and noted to them, we have tried engagement with North Korea in the past, and it has not worked. And they knew that. And I raised it with some of the people that were working on the topic, working on North Korea.
Right, Ambassador, we sort of run out of time, so we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you for taking time to join us on this program and for your insights on religious freedom and human rights issues around the world.
Happy to do so. God bless you all. And I know that there wouldn't be the majority there, but Merry Christmas. If anybody there does celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you too, Ambassador, and to all our viewers as well. Merry Christmas, and do join us on our next program of Daily Mirror World Focus. Till then, stay safe.